Welcome back to the Bee Shoe Show, everyone. I'm your host, Carolina Lopez, and today I have the pleasure to be sitting down with Aeriell, also known as Grad Life Grind, a remarkable individual with expertise in clinical psychology and Latinx mental health. As I started to prepare for the podcast itself, I started to dig into her work, and I was like, wow, oh my God, I love her work and everything that has been entitled into it, right? Ever since the beginning. Not only is Aeriell a clinical psychologist, but she is also an academic content creator, success coach to many in their graduate students' journey. And this makes her authentic because she showcases the tool and her life experiences. I've really fallen in love with your message, really. And as I learned your story, I felt compelled to share with everyone here. She is brilliant and one of a kind. Let's dive into her strength today, which is psychology. Welcome to the show, Aeriell. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. That was such a nice introduction.
Oh, well, let's get started. So, can you share with us your journey in psychology and how your life experiences have shaped your path into becoming a PhD student candidate, but also in the clinical psychology and Latinx mental health?
Yes, so I'm originally from New York, Ecuadorian American. My mom was originally born in New York, and then came to the U.S. when she was pretty young and did school and everything there. So I grew up really close with my grandmother, and that's basically the reason why I learned Spanish at the same time as I learned English, and I'm grateful for that now every single day as a psychologist. So I grew up in New York City. It's an extremely diverse place, and now I live in California, and I moved here for my graduate program. But I think that I carry not just some of the values of just growing up and being from New York City, but the worldview, just making sure that having an inclusive and an authentic way of interacting with people, not just classmates, colleagues, but also the clients that I work with. So I did my undergrad there in New York City in Harlem at the City College of New York, and I studied psychology and I minored in women's studies. And growing up, I think I realized just like the importance of having a safe space. Really, my grandmother was that for me growing up, just had the time, I think, and the personality to be really warm and open and want to hear what's going on in my world and also tell me a lot of stories about my family and our family history. And that made me curious about other people's story. And that's kind of what I do now as a therapist, is unpack, what is someone coming in with, but also where are they coming from? What's their family background? What are some of the not just maybe like traumas and legacies of pain, but also legacies of strength. So that's kind of what I'm curious about and what I build upon in therapy. I've also seen the impact of intimate partner violence in the Latino community, and that's what I focus on in my research. And what I'm working on for my dissertation now is basically an online intervention for Latina women who have been exposed to intimate partner violence. And I've done that work as a therapist, and I do that work as a researcher. And so I have my hand in a lot of different things. But now that I'm about to be completing my PhD this year in clinical psychology, I am really focused on figuring out ways that I can continue to give back and kind of share the story and the process. And that's where Grad Life Grind came from. So figuring out how can I share my process and all the ins and outs of like what it's like to be the first in your family to go to college and then graduate school, and make it just like a little bit less stressful and a little bit more accessible to people who look like you and me.
Exactly. No, that's amazing. I love that. Can you tell us a little bit about like your psychological patients? Like how many years of experience do you have? How has it been like to have patients and how has it helped you with, pursuing your dream, being a grad life grind as you're called on social media?
Yeah. Well, I've worked, so part of the PhD in clinical psychology is a 5 to 7 year program. And that's after getting your undergrad and maybe even master's. I didn't go to get my master's first, but I did obtain it within my PhD program. So just in the PhD program, you do, like I said, 5 to 7 years of courses, research, and clinical training. So each year we're placed at a different site to do our clinical practicum or externship, and that's where we see patients under the supervision of a licensed psychologist, and we're kind of developing our clinical skills. Throughout most of the PhD program, you're doing that at the same time that you're taking classes and working towards research. And sort of as you move through a PhD program, the courses go down and the client load goes up, right? Because you're kind of finishing up classes. And around the third year, people transition into being a candidate, and that really means like you're done with the coursework and some major exams. Usually that's around the time that you confer a master's degree if that's part of your program, and then you continue picking up more clinical responsibility as you move along. And typically for psychologists who are pursuing a doctorate, their final year, that could be fifth, sixth, even seventh year, usually that's where we spend our full-time year doing a clinical internship. And that's like a national match. You can go anywhere in the country that you choose to apply. And so that might be the time that you like move away from where you've been going to school or go somewhere different. I've had the privilege to stay in California, and that's what I'm completing now. So I'm doing my full-time internship, seeing youth and family and adults in Northern California. We do psychotherapy, we do assessment, I do crisis evaluation, lots of other things there. So that's what I'm doing now. And that's sort of one of the final steps aside from the dissertation to graduation.
Well, congratulations. That's a really big step for sure.
Thanks.
And I know that you are basically focused on Latinx mental health. This is like one of your main areas. Could you share some insights into the unique challenges and stigmas surrounding mental health with the Latinx community, and also how your work aims to address these issues? How do cultural factors influence skincare habits and perception of beauty within the community itself?
There's so much. There's so many parts to that question. I'll say the first part, just like stigma related to mental health and what we're working to do to address that. I think that the primary sort of like mental health issues and things that we work on in therapy and even like groups and outreach is stigma related to like whatever the association is between like psychology and seeking services and like being crazy, whatever that may mean for you. I think we've all heard that before, and just the idea that therapy and other psychological services like medication is something that anyone can use at any point in their life, and it's also not forever. The diagnoses are not necessarily forever. So like you can have an anxiety disorder today and not have one 10 years from now. And so I think that part of the issue is being able to explain that things are not as fixed as maybe they once were. And so if you go to therapy or you are diagnosed with like PTSD, that doesn't mean that that's your identity forever. Certainly there are like personality disorders and things that are more fixed over time and things that take longer to recover from. But I think I found it really helpful in outreach and like working with clients, even in therapy, explaining that therapy and diagnoses, like those are supposed to be things that are helpful for us to understand what's going on, like doing an assessment. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything inherently about you. And that this can change, and therapy can be great for you right now and it could be not so useful to you later. And also that therapy isn't the only way to heal. I think that even though I'm a psychologist and I do believe in the power of therapy, we have found ways to heal for generations upon generations. And that can be through just talking with one another, movement, food, self-care practices like skincare and so many other things. And maybe not therapy is not for everybody. And that's true. Like we've seen research that sometimes therapy is helpful and sometimes it's not. So I think that those, like just giving people the facts helps to normalize what therapy is and what therapy isn't, and what could be useful and how it can also not be useful, because that's just the truth. I think sometimes people don't like therapy or medications or all this stuff to be like shoved down their throat as the only way. And I completely get that. Like we've been healing through different things forever. So it's just one of the ways that you can help yourself. In terms of the other part of your question, I think was like how I integrate some of that into my work. Right now, Grad Life Grind is one of the ways I'm able to kind of do mental health outreach, because people are able to see what it's like from the training side. So what does it look like for us to become psychologists? Because people think like, especially if you're older generation Latinos, they'll say like, why would I go tell my problems to a stranger? And they don't understand the training that we undergo and why it would be helpful. And so doing Grad Life Grind is just basically content about what it's like to be a psychologist in training and what it looks like for us to become quote unquote experts in whatever the field we decide to specialize in is. And I think that helps people a little bit with normalizing it, and they can understand like who we are and what we do, and that we're also people too. And then as part of my internship, we do some other types of community outreach, like we do a parenting class in Spanish that's completely open to the community. We do a Spanish language radio show that's in the local radio and also shared like online. And we just talk about different mental health topics. And I think it's really helpful for people to see podcasts like this or radio shows like that or TV segments I've been on, where they see people speaking their language, looking like them, talking about the things that matter to them, but also bringing a new sort of edge of like the science, the research, and all the mental health piece.
Yeah, no, that's definitely really important, and knowing where to find you, right? Because a lot of Latinos or Latinas would not be able to say, hey, they're not open about going to number one
Yeah.
therapy. Like my parents are old school that they're like, no, I'm definitely not. Like if you're going through a struggle, you're just going with it and I'm going to deal with it on my own and continue to be hard. And that's how most of Latinos communities were actually raised, right? So it's kind of hard to break that habit. Have
Yeah.
you seen the newer generations break that habit? And if so, what are some of the correlations that you've seen within them?
I think that, yes, definitely we're seeing a big change in a newer generation. And part of that is because we're seeing more people looking like us doing this. So I'm a Latina therapist and I have a Latina therapist. But I've also had a white therapist and I've also had a therapist who doesn't have as much in common in me. And it's different. It feels different. The experience is different. The level of safety and like vulnerability that you can achieve with that person is different. And that doesn't mean that they're not a skilled clinician, but there's research to support having a shared background. And earlier, I think you asked me about like some of the cultural things that come up,
Yeah.
like some of the cultural themes that have come up. I think that part of it is like a fatalism, which is like this is how it is, and that we call it fatalismo. It's like this is how it is, or like this is your cross to bear, and like there's nothing you can do. And sometimes that's a big barrier to therapy because they're not willing to see how it can be helpful. Of course, there's machismo and even Marianismo that can play into like not wanting to go to therapy. But I think we're seeing really for people who were born in the US or raised in the US that they're a little bit more open because therapy is a Western concept. So they're a little bit more aware. I would say my generation is like more exposed to what does it mean to go to therapy. You also have access to more therapists who look like you. I can understand why 30 years back, 40 years back, when all this clinical psychologists and therapists were white, and there were also not as much research about like cultural differences in therapy and how it's important to address those. A lot of people, like there's a legacy in psychiatry and psychology of a lot of harm towards groups that are non-white. So I could understand that there are people who are distrustful or don't see it being useful or are honestly scared of what might happen if they share certain things in therapy. And so a lot of what we do now is like explaining what it is, being really transparent so that people can make an educated decision about what's best for them and if they want to go for it or not. And again, if they don't want to, it's okay. I think one of the things we struggle with is a lot of people are like, how do you get people to go to therapy when they don't want to? And you can't.
Yeah. So what would you recommend for those people who that maybe they don't want to do it, they don't feel comfortable? As you mentioned, it's not for everyone. What are some of recommendations that you think work for different people that are not open to or don't like therapy? Because not everyone has to do mindfulness, like different things work for different people. And I totally understand that too.
Yeah, I guess it depends what the problem is, right? Like if it's depression, then I might say something different. If it's anxiety, I might say something different. But for our general wellness and like our general mental well-being, I think two of the most important things are having social support. There's a ton of research that regardless of what the mental health challenge is, social support, which is just like having community, is huge. And that's something, if we're speaking directly to Latinos or folks from other diverse backgrounds, that's already a part of us, right? Like that's already more of our culture to be more collectivist and be more like family oriented or friend oriented and just whatever we can do to avoid isolation, like that's never going to be great for our mental health. So the more we can be connected to other people, if it's not a therapist, maybe it's a friend that you can confide in or a family member that you can confide in. And to whatever degree we can spread that across multiple people, I think is also really important. So although we have the younger generation being more open to psychotherapy, we're also seeing that with the more younger generations, we're seeing an overemphasis on romantic relationships and expecting our romantic partner to like be everything, including best friend, confidant, like all of the things. And historically, that hasn't been the case. We've seen people have communities and like a range of friends and multiple family members and multi-generational relationships, grandparents and aunts and uncles, and like everyone coming to support people in like raising children and just life in general. So as much as we can is like being able to foster healthy relationships with other people, not just romantic, not just professional, just in all the ways that we can. And I think that part of what really helps with our psychological health is feeling supported and like feeling that we have somebody in our corner. And so I think that's what I would recommend for people who are struggling in whatever way and they don't think that therapy is for them. How can they increase their supports? I think that people who come to therapy, if you ask them, like, do you feel like you're supported and loved and everyone, like, and that you have people there for you, they'll probably say no. And that's why they're in therapy. But the more that we can do that, the better. The other piece is fostering joy. I think a lot of people in this day and age like have a hard time resting, finding the time for rest, and of course there's financial implications, but whatever we can do that is like brings us joy, that isn't necessarily like a monetary thing, whatever hobbies we had when we were a kid or like the things that we were interested in when we were a child, being able to tap into that is also super important. I think protective for our mental health. It's not going to help you out of like a deep depression because you probably don't want to enjoy anything or like do anything that's fun, but it's something that anybody could do now to kind of protect their mental well-being.
So to get to know a little bit better, right? What are some things that you do that provide joy to your life? And then also, I think there's a confusion between the definition of joy and happiness. How would you define joy? Because different people have different definitions. So I think it's important also to define it here.
Yeah. I think joy, the associations I have with joy are like freedom and wonder. Like if you think about when you were a kid and like you saw something for the first time, like when I was a kid, I can remember like really thinking that planes were cool and like seeing planes fly and like land close to where I lived, and like my mom would take me to go watch the plane, stuff like that. You're like, oh my God, whoa. And it's that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is like real. And also excitement, and like you can think about what your body does when you feel joy, like you're laughing, you're smiling, you're calm, which is so different from when we feel anxious or when we feel depressed or when we feel stressed out. So I think that joy is whatever makes you feel light and free, and maybe isn't necessarily happy, like you said, but makes you feel like you can do anything or like you can be fully present in that moment. For me, those things are like dancing, being outside in nature in general. I never thought that that would be something that I was interested in being from New York City, but when I moved to Northern California, I realized there's so much to see, like Tahoe and like all these beautiful places where you can hike and be outside and connect to nature. And there's a ton of research about that as well. So those are the things that feel freeing and like engaging and I'm fully present in. I don't know what that might be for you, but I think everyone knows, even if they haven't done for a while, what theirs are.
No, definitely. I could totally resonate. I'm the type that going outside, going on a hike, going on a walk, definitely exercising is like big for me for mental health for sure.
Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you, share with us, just with your background, right, in clinical psychology, how this influences skincare and mental health awareness. How do they all intertwine together?
I think they're connected because what's really important for preventing mental health, like more severe mental health issues, is of course social support and joy, but also self-care practices. And a lot of people use skin and skincare as like a self-care practice. And one of the things that I've seen is sort of like more of a popular like theme or maybe even trend is like just the idea of self-care. 10 years ago, we didn't talk about self-care online. That was less of an online presence anyway, but like that wasn't common language to talk about self-care. 20 years ago, I'm sure it was much different. So now that we have that idea and we all can pretty much acknowledge that self-care is important, one of the ways that we can do that is caring for our physical bodies. And I think that skincare is a component of that. And it can be for anyone. It doesn't necessarily have to be for men or for women or like any particular gender. Just caring for your body is really important. And I think that the feeling, the sensations that you get when you're washing your face and putting on a treatment are all things that help you be present. And we need a lot of that right now. Like we're constantly being pinged and our phones are going off and social media and there's notifications and there's emails and there's things that you have to do. So skincare is actually one of the ways that people can practice mindfulness and just like feeling the textures on their hands and feeling the textures and the wet or the dry or the whatever on your skin is one of the ways that we can be in the present moment. And I think that's really the like the valuable piece.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you because something that I've had depression and anxiety before, and I hid in skincare. I would put on my moisturizers, right?
Mhm.
And it would just help me escape from
Yeah.
everywhere but just myself. So
Yeah.
it's one of the ways that I was able to do that before I even knew I was a young adult to
Yeah.
know about, going into a psychologist and getting help for sure.
Yeah.
And another question that I want to ask you is for those who struggle with skincare related insecurities or any insecurities at all, also including anxiety and depression, because it's increased by an 80% since COVID. And
Mhm.
this is high statistics across the US, especially for teenagers and young adults between the ages of 18 to 25. What are some psychological strategies to foster this side effects from self-esteem issues or having sits or different items that we could be so critical about.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a couple of different things. Of course, seeing a therapist is one of the ways, but if that's not accessible to people, and I understand that it's not, I think there's a number of different things that can be helpful. One is thinking about messages that we have about ourselves and values. These are things I do in therapy with people, but you can totally do on your own. Is thinking about what are the I am, like insert blank statements that we have about ourselves, right? So we might have, if we have a negative relationship with self, then we have the kinds of statements like, I'm such a mess, I'm all over the place, or like, I'm not pretty, or I'm, whatever these phrases might be. But like actually writing those things down and figuring out if that's helpful or unhelpful to us and figuring out what we want to do about that. And like if it's really true. And that can be a way that we start to change our thoughts and change our thinking. The other piece is values. So I ask clients about, and friends, like, what are your values? What do you value the most? And you might say, well, I really value connection, and I really value self-care, and I really value family, and whatever it may be. Sometimes we find that when we're in conflict with ourselves or with other people, there's a difference in values. So if I have a problem with you because I was late to the podcast and I don't value being on time, but you do, the conflict is not that there's something wrong with me or something wrong with you. It's that I don't value being on time and you do, right? So with ourselves, it's something similar. Society values these unrealistic, like body and beauty standards and expectations. But if I value connection and community and love and all these other things, then the time I'm spending beating myself up about how I look is not even consistent with the person I want to be and the values that I have. I think that reading and like learning and talking and even listening to podcasts about the beauty industrial complex are also really helpful when you realize that loving yourself and loving the way that you look is really radical politically and just like in general. It can be really helpful. Like, who profits off of me thinking that I'm ugly or that this zit is a problem or that my skin is a problem? There's billions of dollars being poured into us believing that there's something wrong with the way that we look. And that's more of a capitalist issue than it is like an actual issue. So I think all of those pieces, whatever feels like it resonates with you, whether it's sitting down and interrogating some of your thoughts and where you got those from and what you would rather believe about yourself, or it's sitting with your values and realizing, you know what, I don't really value beauty that much. I value like the person I am and love and all these other things. And you can kind of separate yourself from some of those negative beliefs about the way you look. Or if it's like more radical and like socio-political and you're like, actually, I don't want to spend time thinking about this and like being insecure and feeling all these things because this is just fueling an industry that I don't even benefit from. Like whatever it is that works for you might be it can be the strategy.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. And how about the people that like that as you mentioned, we're using a lot of social media, right? Like all the time. Some people are just stuck in it all the time. And they unconsciously are comparing their social media life, which may not be a total reality at all. It's just like something that they post for
Unfollow,
5 minutes.
unfollow, block. I
Okay.
think we really have to be conscious, and I'm sure that you know this as well. Like we have to be conscious about what we're consuming. And
Mhm.
I think that speaks to your product, right? Like a lot of people care right now about making sure that the ingredients that they are getting are clean, that the ways that their products are being sourced are ethical. And I think that we're in a good place, like as a generation, to prioritize those things. But even in the small decisions of like, who do I want to follow and what kinds of things do I want to see on my feed, or how much screen time do I even want to spend? All of those are self-care. Like skincare is self-care, but so is blocking people and unfollowing people.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. It's just knowing boundaries. I think knowing boundaries is important. And sometimes we tend to forget and step back and understand, okay, where is most of my time going to? And am I spending time with myself to grow inwardly as much as I want to grow, right? Because if I'm good, if I'm happy inwardly and I grow inwardly, then I could provide love and, focus attention to the things that I want to pursue or succeed or be joyful about, for sure.
Right.
And now that you mentioned Bijou, let's talk a little bit about it, right? What's your perspective, right, into Bijou intertwining psychology strategies, fitness, skincare, and nutrition, right? How do you anticipate this element will be impacting the skincare routine? And what was your perception about this?
I think my first impression was that it's really cool that there's like this holistic perspective with Bijou. Like we're looking at not just your skincare, but also your physical health, your emotional health. And I think that as a therapist, that really resonates with me. I talk to my clients about their spiritual well-being. I talk to clients about their physical well-being. I talk to them obviously about their mental and emotional well-being, but I'm talking about their social well-being and all these different ways that we're functioning, because everything works together, right? Like everything influences everything in our like inner relationships. So we have our physical health is going to influence how much we want to go out, and our skin is sometimes going to influence, like especially if you have an insecurity, it's going to influence how much you want to interact with other people, or do you want to be seen, or like all of these different things that can influence our mental health. So I'm just happy to see that like this podcast and the wellness component is being considered, and that you're looking at the whole picture and the whole person instead of just skin. Because I think that skin's like the only organ that covers all of us, right? Like, so I think about that being so important for our whole wellness.
Yeah, no, this is totally true, right? Because it's not just the skin, but it's how how you feed your body also affects your skin and affects how you feel, right? If you have a lot of sugar like intake, then you're gonna feel sluggish and tired, or you're gonna have a high peak and so on. So I totally agree with you. And I think this definitely resonates with who I am, as I've definitely struggled with a lot of the issues that I've brought up. And I think that's why this is important for me, for sure. Now, tell me a little bit about where could we find, those radios where you're going to be, where you talk, where could we find you on social media? Any recommendations? Also your website, Grant, you could put that out. Like, where could we find Aeriell?
So the best place to find me, I'm trying to do better about being everywhere, but the best place to find me is on Instagram. That's where I'm the most comfortable. I don't know if it's a generation thing or what. So you can find me at Grad Life Grind on Instagram. I'm also on TikTok at Grad Life Grind, on YouTube at Grad Life Grind. The best thing to do to stay up to date with things like webinars, whether they're mental health related or like professional related, is also on Instagram, and joining my email list, which is in the bio that you can click on my Instagram profile. That's the best way to be up to date on like everything that I have going on. www.gradlifegrind.com is also where you can find things like webinars and physical apparel that I've made. So you can buy sweatshirts, you can buy stickers, you can buy all the things, but you can also work with me one-on-one to pursue your like academic and grad school goals. So I hope that I'll be able to connect with some of you online. You can message me and say, hey, I heard you on the Bijou podcast, and we can talk. I answer all of my DMs. That's sort of like one of the commitments that I've made. So I really appreciate it, and I hope I'll get to connect with more of you.
For sure. And before we let you go, because this has gone so quickly and it's been so great, what are some tips or a book that you're reading, a podcast that you're listening that you would provide to some of our celebrities? I like to call everyone who follows Bijou our celebrity because they're extremely important to us.
I love that. One book that I think is really helpful is Set Boundaries, Find Peace. It's an older one. It's by Nedra Tawwab. She's also a therapist. That's a great book that I think that anyone who's like dealing with trying to set boundaries or access to therapy and like just mental health topics can really benefit from. And a podcast that I love is it's called Homecoming. by Dr. Tama Bryan, who's also a psychologist, and she covers a lot of different topics on there. And she was, I think she still is the president of the American Psychological Association, and that was like a huge deal. So she has a wonderful podcast, and she's one of the psychologists who is known for sort of like elevating liberation psychology and psychology for BIPOC people. So that's a great podcast too. It's been helpful for clients and also just in my own healing process.
Okay. Thank you so much for your recommendations. I definitely loved just spending quality time. It's so sad that it's gone by so quickly. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so this is the Vichy Show. I'm Carolina Lopez signing off for now. Until next time, embrace your beauty, nurture your well-being, and always remember you are enough. Thank you for being part of the Vichy community.